Gabriella Sutton didn't mean to destroy a stranger's morning and his suit with a single spill. But that's exactly what happened the second she turned too fast with a tray of triple-shot lattes and collided full force into a man's hard chest. Hot coffee soaked into the front of his tailored charcoal jacket, dripping down to his crisp white shirt underneath. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Gabriella gasped, wide eyes darting to the mess she'd made. I didn't see you there," he didn't shout. He didn't even flinch. He just stepped back, looked down at his ruined clothes, and then lifted his gaze to meet hers. His suit may have been drenched, but his stare was bone dry. Cool, unreadable, and annoyingly attractive. "I hope that wasn't scalding," he said, deep voice calm, watching her with the kind of stillness that made her feel like she was under a microscope. "It was. It wasn't. It's hot coffee, but not burn your skin off hot," so she stopped, groaning. "I'm sorry. I work at the cafe. I'm not usually this clumsy. I am, but not always. Not like usually." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Right. I can pay for the dry cleaning," she said quickly, already fumbling in the pocket of her apron for her notepad and pen, or a suit replacement, or a new shirt, or all of it. "Whatever you need, I'm just really deeply sorry." He glanced down at the dark stains spreading across his chest. "That's a Tom Ford." Gabriella's heart dropped into her stomach. "Oh God, custom," she winced. "Oh no, around $5,000. She stared at him. "Are you serious?" Deadly. Gabriella's mouth opened, then closed. "I own 2 pairs of shoes and one of them has a hole in it." He looked at her for a second longer, then something in his face shifted. "Keep your shoes." Gabriella blinked. "Excuse me, I'll take a coffee instead," he said, brushing his fingers through his now damp jacket. "Black, no sugar. You're letting me off the hook." A pause. "Not exactly." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked straight into the cafe, leaving her standing on the sidewalk, drenched in caffeine fumes and confusion. Inside, Gabriella tried to catch her breath. She handed him the coffee, still reeling from the fact that she just destroyed a $5,000 suit. He took it with a simple nod. "You're not mad?" she asked softly. He looked at her again, that same calm stillness in his gaze. "You didn't do it on purpose." "But still, That suit could pay off 2 months of my rent." He sipped the coffee. "What's your name?" "Gabriella." "Gabriella Sutton." He nodded slowly, like he was storing it away. "Yarrow Owens." She nearly choked on her own spit. "Yarrow, like the flower." He lifted a brow. "Like the name." She laughed without meaning to. "Okay, sorry, I just wasn't expecting that." He studied her again, and she realized he was trying not to smile. "Yarrow," she repeated, still smiling. "You don't look like a Yarrow." "What do I look like?" "Someone who owns more suits than I've had birthdays." He chuckled then, a quiet, low sound that made her stomach do a weird flip. "Why are you being so nice about this?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. He leaned closer across the counter. "Why are you so nervous?" "Because I just ruined the most expensive piece of clothing I've ever touched." "I said I'd take a coffee instead." Gabriella crossed her arms. "You didn't say I would know you." He tilted his head slightly. "I didn't." She narrowed her eyes. "Okay, what's the catch?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Dinner." Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me." "Dinner, one night, your pick." "You're asking me on a date because I spilled coffee on you. I'm asking you on a date because you're interesting." She blinked. "You're serious?" "Very." Gabriella stared at him, then slowly shook her head. "This is not how my mornings usually go." "Mine either," he said, finishing his coffee in one long sip. So, she hesitated. "You're not going to sue me?" "No." "You're not going to send me a bill for dry cleaning?" "No." "You're not some creep, right?" "No." She studied him for a moment. He wasn't flirty in a sleazy way. He wasn't pushy. He was just calm, confident, and kind of impossible to read. But there was something about him that made her feel safe and curious and very, very thrown off. "What kind of guy wears a $5,000 suit before 8 a.m.? She asked. "The kind of guy who's always working." She squinted at him. "What do you do?" He smiled faintly. "Let's save that for dinner." 3 days later, Gabriella found herself standing outside a restaurant so fancy it didn't even have a sign, just a sleek black awning and a doorman in a tux. She was wearing her nicest dress, which meant a second-hand navy wrap she'd found on sale last year for a wedding she didn't end up going to, and shoes she'd cleaned 5 times. Yarrow stepped out of a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment building. He was in another suit, this one dark blue and flawless, like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "Hi," she said, trying not to sound breathless. "You came. You said dinner. I'm not someone who backs out of a deal." He offered his arm. "Then let's go." Inside, the place was candlelit and quiet, with tables spaced far apart and menus printed on thick cream paper with no dollar signs. Gabriella's eyes widened as she scanned the wine list. "I'm scared to touch this menu. It probably costs more than my groceries." "Order whatever you like," he said, not looking up. "Are you secretly a prince?" His lips twitched. "Not a prince." "Then what are you?" He looked at her. "I own a private investment firm," she blinked. "And what does that mean?" "I fund companies. Mostly tech, real estate, startups." "So, you're rich." He nodded once. "Like really rich, millionaire." "Yes," she exhaled slowly. "And yet, you're sitting across from the girl who dumped coffee on your lap." "I like the way you handled it." She raised an eyebrow. "By stammering and panicking, you were honest. You didn't run. You didn't try to flirt your way out of it. You were real. That's rare." She stared at him. "You're serious, always." Gabriella leaned back in her chair, looking at him like he was a puzzle she hadn't expected to want to solve. "You're the strangest man I've ever met," he smiled then. "A real one." "Good." And for the first time in a long time, Gabriella felt something spark in her chest that she hadn't felt in years, something terrifying, exciting, and completely impossible: hope. "You don't like foie gras," Yarrow said, watching her push the pâté delicately to the edge of her plate. Gabriella set her fork down. "I don't even know what it is." "It's duck liver," she blinked. "That explains literally everything." He gave a short nod, then gestured for the waiter without taking his eyes off her. "We'll swap that for the burrata." The waiter bowed slightly and slipped away without a word. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I didn't want to watch you suffer through it." She folded her hands on her lap, looking at him. "Do you do that often?" "What? Read people that fast?" "I pay attention." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because most people don't." Gabriella studied him, then leaned forward. "Okay, so you're wealthy, you run an investment firm, and you apparently pay attention to the way I react to duck liver. But who are you when you're not being all mysterious in a suit?" Yarrow didn't answer right away. He reached for his wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid before taking a sip. "I like quiet. Sailing, I have a house upstate I rarely use. I listen to jazz when I think, and I don't trust people easily." Her brows lifted slightly. That last part came out of nowhere. He met her gaze. "It's the most relevant." She didn't look away. "Because you're guarded. Because I've seen what people do when they think you can give them something." Gabriella's expression softened. "So you don't date." "I don't date recklessly." She ran her finger around the rim of her water glass. "And yet here you are. You didn't ask for anything. I asked for dry cleaning. You offered it." She smiled despite herself. "Fair." The waiter returned with the replacement dish, and they fell into a lull as he set it down. Once they were alone again, Gabriella picked up her fork. "I've never been in a place like this," she said, cutting into the burrata gently. "The fanciest place I've eaten before this was a fondue restaurant inside a bowling alley." Yarrow took a sip of water. "Did you like it?" "I burned my tongue on the cheese, and the server spilled soda on my jeans." He lifted his glass to her. "A woman of tradition." She clinked hers lightly against his. "And you, what's the worst date you've ever had?" He thought for a moment. "I once went out with someone who asked me how much I made before the appetizers arrived." Gabriella winced. "Wow, romantic." She said she wanted to streamline expectations. She covered her mouth as she laughed. "Did you leave?" "I stayed. But I ordered the most expensive bottle of wine and drank it alone." Petty, calculated, she watched him, the last of her amusement fading into curiosity. "Why me?" He didn't flinch. "You didn't change when I told you what I do. You were exactly the same person." "That's a low bar. It's a rare one." Gabriella paused. "I'm not good at playing the game, if that's what you're hoping for. I know. I'm not rich, I'm not polished. I work 2 jobs and sometimes forget what day it is." "Good." "I already know what it's like to be surrounded by people who only say what they think I want to hear. I say what I'm thinking, even when I probably shouldn't. That's why I asked you to dinner." She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing slightly. You're used to control, aren't you? Yes, and I'm not easy to control. You're not supposed to be, Gabriella blinked. You're full of surprises. Yarrow set down his fork and folded his hands together. You said you work 2 jobs. What's the second one? I do freelance illustrations for an indie comic series. It's not glamorous, but it pays some bills. His brow lifted slightly. What kind of comics? Supernatural noir, lots of trench coats and glowing eyes. I help create the visual mood. That's specific. It's niche, she said with a shrug, but I like sketching things that don't exist yet. He studied her for a moment. You see things other people don't. She looked away. I try to. It keeps me from slipping into routine. What do you want from life? Gabriella let the question hang in the air. Stability, to not panic when I check my bank account, and maybe one day to get my own graphic novel published. You will, she looked at him again. You don't know that. I believe it. You barely know me. I'm good at seeing potential. She stared at him for a long second, her heartbeat ticking a little faster. You're intense. I don't believe in pretending not to care. Gabriella reached for her water glass, suddenly needing something to ground her. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. They paid without discussion. He handed the waiter a black card before she could even reach for her wallet, and when they stepped outside, the air had cooled with the night. The city buzzed in the distance, but their little corner of it felt strangely quiet. You want to walk? He asked. She hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Sure. They fell into step side by side, her heels clicking softly against the pavement while his pace matched hers without effort. Do you ever get tired of all this? She asked, glancing at the passing cars and marble storefronts. Yes. Then why stay in it? Because I built it. She looked at him. That sounds lonely. It is. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then quietly, do you regret it? Yarrow's jaw tensed, but he didn't look away. Sometimes. They walked a little farther in silence before she stopped at the corner where her subway line started. This is me, she said. I'll have a car take you home. I like the train. He didn't argue. He just nodded once. Gabriella hesitated, then turned to face him. Tonight wasn't what I expected. That's good. I still don't know what to make of you. Figure it out. She gave a small laugh. Confident? Certain. She looked at him for a long beat, then stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the wine, or the way he looked at her like she was more than a waitress who spilled coffee. Maybe it was just the way he didn't flinch when she challenged him. Good night, Yarrow. Good night, Gabriella. She turned and disappeared down the steps, and he stayed there at the corner, watching until the crowd swallowed her. Gabriella hadn't expected to see Yarrow again so soon. She definitely hadn't expected him to walk into the cafe the following Saturday afternoon, wearing jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that somehow made him look even more out of place than the suit had. His presence shifted the air. There were no assistants, no briefcase, no phone glued to his hand. Just him, and that unreadable gaze that always made her feel like he was studying something she didn't know she was revealing. I thought you didn't do casual, she said as he approached the counter. I don't, but I make exceptions. Gabriella leaned her hip against the espresso machine. You came all the way down here for another coffee. I came for you. A flush crept up her throat. That's a bold thing to say in front of my manager. I don't see your manager. She took her lunch break 5 minutes ago, then it's perfect timing. Gabriella turned to the register, needing a second to settle her nerves. What are you doing here, really? I want to show you something. She arched a brow. That sounds like the beginning of a bad decision, only if you say no. She glanced at the line forming behind him. Give me 20 minutes to close out. I'll wait. He stepped aside, and as Gabriella rang up customers and wiped down counters, she kept catching him watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable. It was different, intent, focused, like he was trying to understand something. When she finally emerged from the back, jacket in hand, he fell into step beside her as if they'd done it 100 times. Where are we going? She asked as they reached the sidewalk. You'll see. That doesn't narrow it down. Yarrow didn't answer. Instead, he opened the passenger door of a sleek black SUV waiting at the curb. The driver didn't speak, just nodded and pulled smoothly into traffic. As soon as they were inside, Gabriella watched the buildings blur past. "You're not kidnapping me, are you?" "No, just checking." "This would be a weird way to go. You're too stubborn to be kidnapped." She glanced at him. "You say that like it's a compliment." "It is." They drove for nearly 20 minutes before the car turned down a narrow road near the river. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with low buildings and old brick warehouses. The SUV stopped outside a tall structure with massive windows and ivy crawling up the sides. Yarrow opened the door for her. "Come on. What is this place? You asked what I'm like when I'm not in a suit." He unlocked the door and guided her up a set of stairs that creaked slightly as they climbed. When they reached the top, Gabriella stepped into a wide open space flooded with natural light. The walls were bare brick, the floors dark wood, and the only furnishings were a long table scattered with papers, models, and what looked like architectural drafts. Gabriella walked slowly to the windows. "You work here?" "Sometimes, when I want to think." She turned to him. "This doesn't look like an office." "It isn't." He walked over to a shelf and pulled down a sketch pad, handing it to her. She flipped through it, pages of hand-drawn designs, concepts for buildings, cityscapes, and modern interiors. "You're an architect." "I studied it." "Before the investment firm." She looked up. "Why didn't you stay with it?" "I liked it, but I was better at building capital." Gabriella held the sketchbook a little tighter. "Do you miss it?" "Some days more than others." She traced her fingers along a rendering of a rooftop garden. "These are good. They're unfinished." She closed the sketchbook and met his gaze. "So are most things worth doing." Silence stretched for a moment, heavy with something unsaid. Then Yarrow crossed the room, opened a narrow cabinet, and pulled out a flat box. He handed it to her. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a blank hardcover notebook with a smooth leather cover and a set of fine-line pens arranged in a neat row beside it. She stared. "This is expensive." "So is a lost idea." Gabriella looked up. "You bought this for me. You said you sketch." "I thought you should have something better than napkins and receipt paper." She couldn't speak for a second. Then softly, "That's incredibly thoughtful." "I don't do gifts without meaning. That makes this harder to accept." "Why?" "Because I don't want to owe you anything." "You don't." She held his gaze. "People like you don't usually give without expecting something." "I'm not people like me." Gabriella set the box down and crossed her arms. "Then what do you want?" He didn't blink. "Time with you." She let out a breath that was half disbelief, half surrender. "You're serious?" "I always am." She walked to the windows again, trying to steady herself. "I'm not good at this." "I know. I mean it. I don't know how to be with someone who's already figured out their life." "You think I have." She turned. "You walk like you have answers." "I have control." "That's not the same." "Still feels like I'm playing catch-up." "You don't have to." Gabriella looked down at her hands. "I haven't let anyone in for a long time." Yarrow stepped closer. "Maybe now's the time." She didn't move. "Why me?" "Because you challenge me. Because you see things other people don't. Because when I'm around you, I stop thinking about what I should be doing and start wondering what I want." She swallowed hard. "That's a lot to put on someone." "I'm not asking you to carry it. I'm asking if you want to see where it goes." Gabriella stared at him, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to run, but louder than all of that, a quiet voice whispered, "Stay." She nodded once. "Okay." Yarrow's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders eased. "Then let's go somewhere." "Where now?" He held the door for her. "Someplace that doesn't require reservations." As they stepped into the late afternoon light, Gabriella realized something had shifted. Not with a dramatic confession or sweeping gesture, but with the quiet certainty of someone choosing to stay instead of walk away. Yarrow's townhouse in Tribeca didn't look like the kind of place that had ever hosted impulsive dinners or last-minute guests. The entrance was tucked behind tall wrought iron gates, and the foyer alone was larger than Gabriella's entire apartment. A sweeping staircase curved upward beneath a skylight, and a long hallway led to a sunken living room filled with clean lines, low furniture, and art that didn't try too hard to be understood. She stopped just inside the doorway, still holding her coat. "I feel like I should take off my shoes." "You don't have to," Yarrow said, already walking toward the kitchen, but you can if you want to feel less like you're trespassing." "I already feel like I am," Gabriella said, slipping them off anyway. "You said someplace that didn't require reservations." "You didn't say you meant your house. You didn't ask. You keep doing that." He looked over his shoulder. "Doing what? Giving me half the information and letting me blindly agree to the other half. That's not intentional. It's effective, though." He set 2 plates on the counter. "It's because I don't want to over-explain things that should just be experienced." Gabriella raised an eyebrow. "Like pasta," he glanced at the pot on the stove. "Like comfort, most of my life is curated. I don't want this to be." She walked over slowly, eyeing the food. "You cook when I need to clear my head, and you needed to clear your head tonight. I wanted to be somewhere that felt real." He handed her a glass of wine, then gestured to the bar stools at the island. "Sit." Gabriella took the seat cautiously. "You're hard to read, you know that, I've been told. I don't always know what you want." He poured himself a glass and leaned on the counter. "That's fair. So, I want to be around you when I'm not working. I want to understand how you think. I want to help you finish that sketchbook. You gave me that so I'd finish it. I gave you that so you'd stop making excuses." Gabriella blinked. "You think I'm making excuses?" "I think you're afraid of what happens if you go all in." She took a sip of wine. "That's not a wild guess. I've been there." She looked at him, really looked at him. "You're used to being the one who controls the pace, the one who doesn't get hurt." He didn't deny it. "I've built walls that people don't even try to climb." "Why me?" "Because you weren't trying to get anything from me. You just were." Gabriella leaned forward, elbows on the counter. "That's not a small thing for someone like you." "No, it isn't." They ate, the room filling with the quiet sounds of forks tapping china and the soft hum of jazz from the speakers tucked into the corners of the ceiling. When they finished, Gabriella stood and wandered to the wall of bookshelves that lined the far side of the living room. "You read all of these?" "I've read most of them," Yarrow said, drying his hands on a linen towel. "The ones that aren't for show." "Which ones are those?" He walked over and pulled down a dog-eared copy of a novel with a cracked spine. "This one got me through my first year at university." She turned it over in her hands. "You don't strike me as someone who needed help with anything." "You'd be surprised." She set the book down gently. "You let people assume you're untouchable. It makes things easier." "For who?" He met her gaze. "For me, until now." Gabriella folded her arms across her chest. "You're saying this like it's a decision you've already made." "It is. That's a lot to put on one night. It's not just tonight, but it started with a coffee spill." "Sometimes the most unexpected things are the ones that matter." She didn't look away. "And what if I don't know what this is yet? Then we figure it out together." She closed the distance between them slowly. "I don't want to be an escape. You're not. You're the first person who's made me stop running." She reached up and touched his jaw, just beneath the stubble that had started to grow in. "You say things like that and expect me not to fall for you." He caught her wrist gently. "I want you to." Her breath caught. "I don't want this to be temporary," he said. "I'm not interested in dates that end with disappearing acts. I want mornings. I want bad days. I want to be there when your first graphic novel comes out and your hands shake holding it." Gabriella's eyes stung before she could stop them. "You make it hard to keep walls up. Then stop trying." She kissed him before she could talk herself out of it. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a decision. Like pressing a key on a piano and knowing the note would echo forever. When she pulled back, she was breathless. "I don't know how to do this slowly." "Then don't." She leaned her forehead against his chest. "I've never felt this seen before." He wrapped his arms around her. "You've just never had someone who knew how to look." Weeks passed. Gabriella didn't move into the townhouse, but she started leaving things behind her: sketch pens, a sweater, a half-finished novel. Yarrow didn't talk about it. He just built space for her quietly. A drawer, a shelf, a seat at the table. They fought once about something stupid, like a missed call, but it ended with both of them on the couch, tangled up and apologizing. It wasn't perfect. It was just real. One evening, Gabriella came home from a gallery showing where one of her panels had been displayed for the first time. She was buzzing with adrenaline, still in her boots, when she found Yarrow standing in the kitchen. He was holding something behind his back. "What is that?" she asked, dropping her bag. He brought it forward, a black frame, clean and simple, with one of her sketches inside. It was the first one she'd drawn in the leather notebook he'd given her. A rooftop, unfinished but beautiful. "You had this framed," he nodded. "I wanted something of yours in this house. It's not even done." "I don't care, it's yours." She stepped toward him. "You're not afraid of this anymore." "I was never afraid of you." She kissed him again, slower this time, and when she pulled back, she whispered against his lips, "I love you." He held her face in both hands. "I've loved you since the minute you ruined my suit. Don't tell me that's why you wore it." "No," he said, "but I'm glad you did." They laughed. They kissed. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by candles and pasta dishes waiting to be washed, Gabriella knew something with absolute certainty. She hadn't just spilled coffee on a stranger. She'd found the person who made her feel like she belonged in a world she never thought she'd fit into. And he had chosen her, not despite where she came from, but because of it. Gabriella stood in front of the tall mirror in Yarrow's bedroom, smoothing out the lines of her deep emerald gown. The fabric clung in elegant curves, flowing down into a soft train that shimmered subtly under the soft lighting. She barely recognized herself, her hair swept into soft waves, eyes lined with smoky precision, lips stained with a color called crushed velvet she'd never have dared pick on her own. Behind her, Yarrow adjusted the cufflinks on his shirt, catching her eye in the mirror. "You look like you stepped out of a Degas painting. You say that like it's a normal thing to say before a gala. It is when you're the most beautiful thing in the room." She turned, crossing her arms. "You didn't tell me this was a charity event for the Metropolitan Arts Council. You didn't ask. That's your answer to everything." He took a step closer, resting one hand on her waist. "You're an artist. You belong there." "I belong in a cafe with foam on my apron. Not tonight." She studied his expression. "What exactly is this?" He leaned in slightly. "This is me showing you off." She narrowed her eyes. "To the world," he clarified. "Not as a trophy, as someone I admire. Someone I love." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "You've said that before. I'll keep saying it until you believe it." Without bracing. Outside, the car was already waiting. Yarrow's driver opened the door, and inside, the seats were soft cream leather, the city glittering through the windows like 1,000 tiny promises. When they arrived, Gabriella stepped out into a sea of flashbulbs and designer gowns. She held tight to Yarrow's arm, her fingers tightening just slightly as they walked the carpet. He leaned toward her. "Breathe. That's easy for you to say. You've done this 100 times. There's a first time for everything." Inside, the ballroom was all glass and chandeliers, tables dressed in crystal and silver. Waiters wove through the crowd with trays of champagne and delicate canapés. Yarrow greeted people with brief nods, never letting go of her hand. Halfway through the evening, Gabriella spotted a familiar face across the room. Her former art professor, Judith Marlowe, stood beside a large installation piece, sipping wine and scanning the crowd. Gabriella hesitated. Yarrow followed her gaze. "You want to say hello?" "She probably doesn't remember me." "She will when you remind her." Gabriella approached the older woman cautiously. "Professor Marlowe." The woman turned, her expression shifting from polite interest to recognition. "Gabriella Sutton." "My goodness. I didn't think you'd remember me. You submitted a final portfolio with more raw heart than I'd seen in 5 years. I never forgot that." Gabriella smiled, nerves easing. "That means a lot. Are you still drawing?" "I am. Actually, I'm working on a full-length graphic novel. The first draft is nearly done." Judith's eyes lit up. "Send it to me when it's ready. I consult for a few small presses now." Gabriella blinked. "Seriously? Talent like yours doesn't stay small forever." They spoke for a few more minutes, and by the time Gabriella returned to Yarrow's side, her hands were trembling with something new, hope. "That looked promising," Yarrow said. "She wants to see my work." "She should." "It's brilliant." Gabriella stared at him. "You keep doing this." "What?" "Pushing me forward. Believing for me. Because I know what I see when I look at you." Later that evening, as the auction began, Gabriella watched a bidding war erupt over a piece she'd admired earlier, a moody oil painting of a city skyline at night, all sharp edges and glowing windows. Yarrow raised his card near the end. The auctioneer pointed, "Sold, to Mr. Owens." Gabriella turned to him in disbelief. "You bought that? I thought it would look good above your desk. I don't need expensive paintings. You don't need to keep proving you deserve nice things." After the event, they rode home in silence, his hand resting on her knee. The city passed outside the window like a dream she hadn't asked for but was slowly learning to live in. When they reached the townhouse, she followed him to the rooftop. The night was clear, stars faint against the glow of Manhattan. Candlelight lined the edge of the terrace, and a small table stood waiting, a single covered dish at its center. Gabriella blinked. "Are we still eating?" He lifted the lid. A cupcake, vanilla with gold-dusted frosting. She frowned, amused. "This is either incredibly romantic or incredibly confusing." Yarrow reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a ring that sparkled like it had stolen light from the moon. Gabriella stared at it, breath frozen. "I wasn't planning to ask you tonight," he said, "but I realized there's no perfect moment, just the right one, and this is it." She looked up, tears rising too fast to stop. "I know we're fast, I know it's wild, but every day I'm with you feels like a life I didn't know I was allowed to have. I want to build a future with you, not because it's safe, but because it's real. And because you make me want more than the life I built alone." Gabriella's voice shook. "You're serious?" "I always am." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Yarrow slid the ring onto her hand. It fit perfectly. They didn't speak for a moment. They just held each other, the city stretching out beneath them, quiet and infinite. 6 months later, the gallery was full. People milled between framed panels of Gabriella's debut novel, the ink between admiring the textures, the shadows, the aching humanity in every stroke. Judith had delivered on her promise. The book had sold out its first run. A second was already in production. Yarrow stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "You ready to leave early?" he asked quietly. "I thought you liked these things." "I like you," she grinned. "Let's go." Outside, the driver held the door open. But instead of heading home, the car turned toward the private airfield just outside the city. Gabriella glanced at him. "Where are we going?" "I bought a place." She blinked. "What kind of place?" "A house on a cliff in Amalfi with a studio facing the sea." She laughed. "You bought a house in Italy?" "I thought you could sketch there." "And what would you do?" "I'll figure it out." He kissed her temple. "I'm good at building things." As the jet climbed into the clouds, Gabriella leaned her head against his shoulder, the ring on her finger catching the light. "I still can't believe any of this is real," she whispered. Yarrow kissed her hair. "Believe it, you made it real." She closed her eyes, a smile forming as the hum of engines lulled her into a peace she'd never known before. They weren't perfect. They didn't need to be, they had each other. And that made all the difference.